Hello, I'm the Media Whiz, because one art form wasn't enough. Well, it's been voted, so for this comic review, let's talk about Mighty Morphing Rump Rangers. It sucks. Now let's talk about Alone in the Dark. Okay, this requires some explanation. When I put up a poll for what the next comic review should be, the highest polling choice was an adult porno spoof comic made to parody Power Rangers. Simply because it looked bad and I thought it would make for a funny review subject. But after reading through it to take some notes, I honestly had little to say. Not to say that it was good, no, far from it. But it honestly gave me little to work with. I mean, I could talk about how the artwork is ugly for the sake of being ugly. I could say the humor mostly relies on easy gross out. I could make fun of the dialogue, which the comic doesn't seem to have a lot of. I could talk about how it really doesn't do much with the source material. I fully admit I'm not the biggest Power Rangers expert, hence why the only Power Ranger reviews I've ever done were Alpha's Magical Christmas and Agony in Pink. But even I could tell this comic didn't do much as a parody of Power Rangers. The closest thing to parodying the Rangers is calling the Pink Ranger the Mauve Ranger. Yeah, that's the cleverest thing you're gonna get with the characters. Everything else just comes off as confusing more than anything. Like, the villain in this does not look anything like the major villains from the show. Not Rita Repulsa, not Lord Zed, not even Goldar. Instead, he looks like a knockoff Juggernaut, and the lackeys look like a parody of the CDA. I mean, come on, Mighty Morphin was on for 2 years at that point. This comic came out the same year that the first theatrical movie came out. And then there are these demon guys, who I guess are supposed to be parodies of Bulk and Skull, just based on them being a duo of fat guy and skinny guy who antagonize the Rangers. And that's about it. There's really not much to this comic. Honestly, it was more interesting to learn about the comic company that put it out more than the actual comic itself. Being released under Boneyard Press, run by Hart D. Fisher, the self-proclaimed most dangerous man in comics. Most of Boneyard's output were edgy shock jock style comics that were admittedly popular in the 90s, often tackling taboo subject matter like O.J. Simpson, Rush Limbaugh, and most notoriously, Jeffrey Dahmer, on more than one occasion. Oh, and they openly took shots at Marvel. Hell, this right here is an ad at the end of this comic. I think it's safe to say Hart D. Fisher didn't like Marvel very much. Oh, and he also sued them for the name Dark Angel, which is ironic because the families of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims tried suing him because of his comics. Last thing I could possibly add to any of this is the title is just lame. I mean, Mighty Morphing Rump Rangers. That was the best you could come up with. You know, it's saying something when another crappy black and white parody comic comes up with a better porno spoof sounding title with Naughty Nighty Powder Puffers. And when you make Mightily Murdered Power Rangers look good in comparison, I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, to the surprise of nobody, Mighty Morphing Rump Rangers sucks. But since I still wanted to do a comic review, I decided to go with the second highest polling and talk about the Alone in the Dark comic, Life is a Hideous Thing. For some background, Alone in the Dark was originally a PC game released in 1992. At the time, it was considered revolutionary to be one of the first games to use fully 3D graphics. And oh boy, does it show! Some have criticized the controls for not holding up all that well in hindsight, but nevertheless, the game is still hailed as a classic in survival horror games. The overall plot revolves around two paranormal investigators wandering around a mansion and searching for horrifying Lovecraftian abominations. The game was so popular, it spawned its own little franchise. Sequels, remakes, reboots, a crappy film adaptation by Uwe Boll, and 2 comic books. The first is a graphic novel that was released entirely in French in 1994, tying into the third game. The other is what we're looking at today. Life is a Hideous Thing is a one-shot comic released in 2001 over in France, and then was later released in the States in 2002. It was put out by Semic Comics, who specialized in French translations of comics from a lot of the big higher-end comic companies. Or at least they did until they closed up shop in 2005, and then were later bought out in 2011, where they mostly just do cross-marketing stuff for Marvel. Will this comic hold up? I don't know. It's gotta be better than the Alone in the Dark movie. Then again, what isn't? This is Life is a Hideous Thing. Well, we start off on the right foot with a pretty cool cover. Our two main characters, Edward and Aline, together in a darkly lit room with some kind of eldritch abomination ready to get them. All the while, Edward strikes a pose and tries to shoot at the creature. The story begins in a small Indian town outside of Nepal, as Aline and her colleague, Frank, are looking for someone in a little bazaar, but it seems all is lost since they can't seem to find what they're looking for, with Frank telling her this is just another one of her wild goose chases. But she reminds him that he still felt the need to tag along, which he responds by saying that it's dangerous for a woman to be tagging along in this part of the world alone. Oh, lay off me. It's not any more dangerous than Central Park. Only for the next page to have them be immediately threatened by some brutes with swords. Aline shoots at one of them, and as they flee, Frank distracts the rest of them with pocket change. They take out a few more of the toughs before things escalating as a lady in a helicopter who's after Aline and her map. Diana Armentag, that Tomb Raider crook! And this is probably the closest you're going to get to an Alone in the Dark crossover with Tomb Raider. Appropriate since both games had very polygon-looking characters when they first came out. They managed to give the helicopter the slip by simply putting on some robes, and then they decide to head back to their hotel for a stiff one after the day they've had. But ruh-roh raggy, just as they're checking in, the sword-wielding bad guys are back. And I love how nonchalant this guy in the center is. But before he can do anything, a powerful ally of our heroes steps in and breaks up the fight, even getting our smug friend Ali thrown out of the hotel. Over here, son of a decentric camel. Well, that's an insult you don't hear a lot. And then Ali returned to his life on the street where him and his monkey friend swindled bread from people. But that's a whole other story entirely.
Riff-raff, street rat, I don't buy that.
The man in the suit, named Ganesha, reveals that he's the man they were looking for, who can point them in the direction of what exactly they're looking for. Meanwhile, we see our other main character, Edward, sitting with a man in Nepal, as this little caption box in the corner lets us know. Yeah, thanks, we can kind of see that we're in a smoky room somewhere in Nepal. Thanks for that. The guy is Dr. Lang, an associate of Mr. Fisk from the games. Edward alerting Lang about some kind of ancient evil called the Kun Yin that could possibly be returning. Even though it seems they were eradicated a long time ago, Edward suspects that they will be coming back. You know the saying, weed always grows back. Is that a saying now? They run down some exposition about the artifact called the Crown of Genghis. The point is, it has supernatural powers, a lot of people are after it, and of course, Bureau 713 are trying to get it before it falls into the wrong hands. Anyway, Edward jumps out of the doctor's flying ship, with a shot of him being Billy Badass and parachuting out. Back with the others, they traverse across the mountains, Ganesha revealing that he's mostly helping them for the money, even mentioning that he gets a share of the profits off of the discovery. This leading to a truly interesting discussion about doing stuff for scientific breakthroughs or for the profit. After Ganesha yells to scare off some yetis, this will be important later. They work their way into the cave and smash open an entrance, not heeding any of the warnings of the scary eldritch things on the walls. They work their way in, and we see the yetis that he was shouting at were actually for realsies. And yet, having yetis in Alone in the Dark is still less confusing than having yetis in the third Mummy movie. Seriously, what was up with that? They shoot at the yetis and run for their lives. It seems they finally found the temple they were looking for, but it also seems that they're outnumbered by the yetis. But they're scared off by Edward. They regroup in another part of the caves, and Edward reveals why he's there. Not to make any money or to collect the artifact, but to destroy it. He says that he could keep the whole thing a secret, but they deserve a honest answer. Edward Carnby, streetwise badass fighter of the supernatural, and not one for basic English because he's too cool for school. Though then again, the comic company that put this out is French, so more than likely that's just a simple translation error. Edward also reveals the Yetis were once an ancient wise people called the Yian Ho, but they were cursed by the powers of the crown. The next day they continue on and find a fork in the cave that might have the ancient city of Agaratha that Aline has been looking for. They end up finding the temple with the crown, as well as the guarding Rakasha people that Edward mentioned in the form of statues, and it's here where we get a twist. Frank was actually looking for the crown the whole time. As he rushes towards it, puts it on, and instantly becomes possessed. Poor fool, Frank is dead. The time of the scythe is upon us, and me, the servant of darkness, will finally release onto the earth the hideous power. And you gotta love the hint at the bottom saying this is continuing into another issue right now.
I gotta admit, that's pretty funny. The possessed Frank brings the Rakasha statues to life to attack our heroes, but Ganesha goes full Ash Williams mode and begins blasting them with his boomstick. In a bit of quick thinking, Aline begins speaking the language of the Rakasha, tricking them, which gives them enough time to slip away. They run into the yetis again, and she begins speaking their language, and it somehow works. Ganesha runs off to save his own hide, much to the disapproval of his old friend Edward. Edward and Aline are left to stop the Servant of Evil themselves, so they're gonna need one of the yetis to help them get to the Stone of the Heart of the World. While making their way down, Edward asks where she got the map in the first place.
Did it come from the Nazi expedition Ultima Thule? How did you get it?
I found it in a secret compartment in my father's trunk.
Which would mean your father was part of Ultima Thule.
I don't know. I hoped to find clues somewhere.
Well, that's a pretty casual way of brushing off the fact that your father may or may not be connected to the Nazis.
After Edward exposits about Agartha, bringing up a scythe constellation that connects to the crown, they end up finding the lost civilization, only to be attacked by a giant insect, which has become giant because of the scythe constellation that they mentioned. But leave it to the Yeti to take down the giant bug monster. They may have killed off the beast, but they come across a possessed Frank who's about to strike them down with his demonic powers. But before he can take down Aline, Edward blocks the blow and goes down himself, unleashing this Cthulhu-style monster god called the Creeping Chaos. After showing everyone outside of Agartha, including Ganesha, Lang, and the Yetis, Aline uses a spell of her own to take the crown off of Frank so she can place it on herself. Ultimately, the crown is destroyed, and they make it out of there. And so the comic ends with everyone, except Frank, who died when he initially put the crown on, flying off in Lang's ship, setting up for the events of Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare. Mr. Carnby, Dr. Lang wants to see you. It's about Mr. Fisk. Bad news, I'm afraid.
How could I ever thank you?
If a wedding is impossible, there is a temple in Narada.
So that was Alone in the Dark, Life is a Hideous Thing. How's it fare up? It was better than the Alone in the Dark movies.
I freely admit, I'm not the biggest expert on the Alone in the Dark series, so I don't really know if I could say whether or not this is a good or bad way to lean into New Nightmare. Out of curiosity, I looked to see what fans of the games felt about this comic, and it seemed like the reaction was mostly mixed. One complaint that I do agree with is the horror elements are pretty lacking in this comic, feeling less like Alone in the Dark and more like your run-of-the-mill Tomb Raider style action-adventure. I also felt the pacing was a little rushed, especially at the end. I can't really say for sure if this is what happened, but it kind of feels like they tried to cram a little too much plot into one single one-shot comic. The artwork for a 2000s comic is fine for the most part, and I'd say it's one of the better things about the comic, despite the occasional goofy face here and there, and some of the backgrounds feeling a little empty, usually using singular colors to fill up space. Still, I don't feel comfortable saying this is a bad comic, but maybe that's just because I'm not too familiar with the games. I don't think it's that bad, but unless you're an Alone in the Dark completionist, or just want a basic action-adventure story with some light horror elements, I'm not really too sure if I can recommend this all that much.
You know what I can say with absolute certainty? Despite this comic's many flaws, and despite my jokes and my criticisms, this comic was still immensely readable compared to Mighty Morphing Rump Rangers, that's for damn sure. I'm the Media Wiz, cause one art form wasn't enough. Well, at least lazy, gross-out comics like this went out of fashion, and they wouldn't possibly release something this bad in the current day, right? Okay, you know what? Forget I even said anything. Clearly they are still making crap like this, aren't they?